Good morning. I would like to welcome you all to the 15th meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Local Authorities, Service Commissions, and Statutory Authorities, including the THA, in the 12th Parliament. This meeting is being streamed live on Parliament YouTube's channel, ParlView. And today we are covering a public hearing pursuant to our inquiry into the regulation of the pesticide and pest control industry in Trinidad and Tobago as it pertains to pesticides and toxic chemicals Inspectorate. And this morning we are pleased to have before us officials of the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries. At this stage, I would like the representatives from the Ministry of Health to please introduce yourself, starting with Mr. Asif Ali, the Permanent Secretary.
Thank you and good morning, Chairman. Asif Ali, Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Health.
Morning.
Good morning, Chair and members. Dr. Roshan Parasram, Chief Medical Officer, Ministry of Health.
Welcome, welcome.
Good morning, Chair. Melanie Noel, Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Health.
Good morning, Mala Kaulasa Tegali, Legal Advisor, Ministry of Health.
Hi, Chair, good morning. Faz Khan, Chief Chemist Director, Chemistry, Food and Drugs, Ministry of Health.
Hi, good morning, Chair. Hazmat Ali, Registrar Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals, Ministry of Health.
Thank you all for being here. And at this stage, I would like the officials from the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries to introduce themselves, starting with Dr. Simone Titus.
Hi, good morning, Chair and members. I am Dr. Simone Titus, Acting Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Yes, hello, morning, Chair. My name is Kishore Ragbir. I'm the Acting Deputy Director for Research Crops at the Ministry of Agriculture.
Good morning, Chair. My name is Amir Ruknarayan Singh, the Acting Deputy Conservator of Forestry Division in the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
Good morning, Chair. My name is Amel Baksh, Acting Technical Officer, Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries.
So welcome all. And I am Dr. Varmadi Singh, an independent senator and chair of this inquiry this morning. And I would like my members of the committee to please introduce themselves now.
Morning, Chair and everyone. Lawrence Hislop, member.
Right.
Good morning, everyone. Ayana Webster Roy, member.
Good morning, everyone. I am Jan Lachmidial. I am a member of the committee.
Sure. I think Ms. Morris Julian is probably having some technical difficulties. So,
hi, no, sorry, sir. I'm
oh,
here.
sure. Oh, you're here. No problem.
Sorry,
Thank you.
sorry,
okay,
here.
Good.
Good morning, everyone. Lisa Morris Julian, member.
Thank you for being here. So, as we have all introduced ourselves, the objectives of this inquiry would be to, one, assess the operational efficiency of the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Inspectorate. Two, to assess the effectiveness of the Inspectorate in regulating the use of chemicals, including pesticides, to alleviate the potentially harmful effects on the population and the environment. And three, to evaluate the adequacy of the regulatory framework that guides the work of the board and the Inspectorate in the execution of their mandate. At this stage, I would like the following persons to make brief 2 minutes opening statements. And I would like to start with Mr. Asif Ali, the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, good morning again. Good morning to members of the committee, my colleagues from the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, fellow colleagues from the Ministry of Health and the viewing public. Chair, we will all agree that the Pesticide and Toxic Chemicals Inspectorate performs a critical function in the registration, sale and distribution of pesticides and toxic chemicals as detailed within their specific regulations. In this regard, Ministry of Health welcomes this opportunity to share with the committee and the public the work of the Inspectorate and welcomes any feedback and suggestions coming out of today's discussions. I'm sure that the observations and recommendations will no doubt assist us as we seek to continuously improve and build upon the work already being done by the Inspectorate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. At this stage, with Dr. Simone Titus, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, give us a 2-minute opening statement.
Good morning. Food security is of national concern. It not only addresses the production of more food, but also safer food. Sustainable pesticide use balances the need for productivity with the need to preserve human health and the environment for present and future generations. So the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fishery aims to promote domestic agricultural production to address national concerns relating to food security, reduction of the food import bill, and diversification of the economy. The legal framework for the management of pesticides has been primarily established via the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Act, number 42 of 1979. So pesticide management in Trinidad and Tobago is primarily provided by Pesticide and Toxic Chemicals Board. It must be noted that successful pesticide management requires consistent and effective collaboration among various stakeholders, inclusive of various ministries and sectors of the society. Whilst pesticides are important in managing crop loss from pests, their misuse, however, can lead to negative effects. And some of these negative effects include destruction of natural control mechanisms, development of pesticide resistance, contamination of food and water resources, and reduction in biodiversity inter alia. The Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries welcomes the opportunity to clarify any matters pertaining to these. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Titus. At this stage, I would like to just make mention that pesticides are meant to kill living things, and herbicide, insecticide, rodenticide, fungicide, disinfectants also, and it will target pests, but sometimes it also poisons our environment, affecting marine life and causing cancer and neurological problems in our citizens. Heavy metals could be found in our fish, pregnant women affected, and born children are affected. And as a physician, and I'm sure Dr. Parasram is also very pleased to be here this morning to see if we can somehow be able to mitigate against the poisoning that occurs in our environment. And we also have to beware of hidden sources like mildew-free shower curtain, mold-free paint, soap like Tetmasol soap. I think Dr. Parasram would remember a few years ago, mothers were misusing this soap, bathing their children with it, and they were getting neurological damage. And we all know the story of DDT, which was once hailed as a savior against malaria, dengue, and typhus. And actually, it was the scientist who discovered how it worked was given a Nobel Prize. But then, lo and behold, later on, it was seen that this caused such a great environmental problem that we were told that we had to stop the use of this. And saying here, we are here today to look and see if there are any sort of pesticides in the environment, any sort of pesticide that should be reviewed, getting permission to be used here. Also, we are here today to examine if there are any shortcomings, any shortfalls, any need to beef up the systems in the Inspectorate. So this morning, it's my pleasure to be here as a practicing physician, and I know that I'm hoping that we can get something that will give a greater safety to our citizens. I want to remind members, please, that activate your devices on your microphone when they are acknowledged by the chair and turn it off. And the questions of any official to be please direct it through the chair. So at this stage, I would like to start the proceedings with a question and coming from our member, Senator Lakshmi Dayal. Senator.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I do apologize. I am stuck in traffic, so I apologize to the members present this morning for the fact that I'm in my vehicle. I just want to, as the chairman said, one of the things we're looking at is really the effectiveness of the inspectorate. So I think it would be useful as a starting point for us and for members of the public who may not be aware, if an official from the ministry can give us a brief synopsis of the role of the inspectorate versus the board, and describe for us the working relationships. As Dr. Titus mentioned, there are a lot of stakeholders involved in this area of pesticides and chemicals. So give us a brief synopsis of the working relationships, I think, between the board, the inspectorate, the Ministry of Health, and the Ministry of Agriculture, so that we understand who is who and who has what responsibility, and how you all are currently functioning as a collaborative team, if so, to manage this issue of pesticides and toxic chemicals.
Sure, thank you. Chair, if I may, I will let Mr. Ali, our registrar, answer that question, please. Thank you.
Good morning again to the esteemed panel. With regards to the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Control Board and the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Inspectorate and our relationship, I would start off first by the board by saying that the board has been established under the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Act to ensure the management of pesticides and toxic chemicals in Trinidad and Tobago. The board has quite a few functions listed under the Act, and the main one, of course, with regards to pesticides, is ensuring that all pesticides, before they are imported into Trinidad and Tobago, they are first reviewed, they are screened, and then registered before they are allowed to enter the country. The board also has the remit to look at the general landscape with regards to pesticides management within Trinidad and Tobago, and to ensure that pesticides are used in accordance with its registered use, thereby mitigating against issues that may be around the issues of health and the environment. The Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Inspectorate is basically the arm that does the day-to-day activities and ensure the functions under the Act with regards to the licensing of premises, the sale and distribution of pesticides, the importation, the inspection of those shipments that come in are conducted and are done so in accordance with the regulations, various regulations under the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Act. The Inspectorate is also very vigilant with regards to issues that occur in the public domain with regards to pesticides being abused and misused, as well as if there are issues with regards to pesticides being used. Information from the Inspectorate is transferred back to the board, who could then review any pesticide that requires that sort of review in accordance with the regulations. The Inspectorate is also very engageful with regards to public awareness and sensitization with regards to the safe use and distribution of pesticides in Trinidad and Tobago. Hope I answered the question.
Chair, if I may, sorry members, Chair, if I may, maybe you want to just speak a bit about the Ministry of Agriculture in terms of their link on the board, to clarify that part of it.
Thank you, PS. The Ministry of Agriculture, well, let me start first. The Ministry of Health, the Chief Medical Officer, is the chair of the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Control Board, and the Chief Technical Officer from the Ministry of Agriculture is the Deputy Chair of the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Control Board. The Ministry of Agriculture also has other officers who are within the board, and those would be the Director of Research. There's also the services of the entomologist, who is used with regards to the review and screening of pesticides, So it's we do have a very engageful relationship with the Ministry of Agriculture. We also would engage through the Chief Technical Officer, the services of the ETIS, the Extension, Training and Information Services of the Ministry of Agriculture when it comes to training and information sharing with our farmers.
I would like to, how often does the board meet?
The Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Control Board has 4 meetings for the year, and those would be full meetings, meaning that all members of the board attend those meetings. There are also 4 technical review committee meetings, which are intersessional between those board meetings, and those meetings are specifically carded to review pesticides that were submitted for registration or pesticides that need to be reviewed as a result of them being identified as causing harm to the public.
According to the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries submission, the board is in the process of transitioning to approval of more environmentally safe chemicals from organic and natural-based products as used in regenerative agricultural practices. The question I ask, have revisions been made to the approved import list to increase the number of organic toxic chemicals in order to facilitate regenerative agricultural practices?
Sorry, Chair, thank you. Registrar?
Sorry, I did not get that question. The bandwidth was apparently breaking up. Didn't have a stable connection when the question was being asked.
Have revisions been made to the approved import list to increase the number of organic toxic chemicals in order to facilitate regenerative agricultural practices? This question was based on the Ministry of Agriculture and Land and Fisheries submission, where it was stated that the board is in the process of transitioning to approval of more environmentally safe chemicals from organic and natural-based products as used in regenerative agricultural practices.
Again, I did not get the entire question, but I'll attempt to answer it, Chair. The Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals would register pesticides based on a set criteria in the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Act. So there are a number of things that are asked during the registration of a pesticide. What the board has been doing over the years, because we are also signatory to a number of international conventions, specifically the Rotterdam and Stockholm Convention, we have been looking at the pesticides that have been listed either by the Chemical Review Committee or the Persistent Organic Pollutant Review Committee. And we've been guided by those principles in terms of pesticides that are harmful to the environment and been taking very swift action in terms of removing those pesticides from registration. The Food and Agriculture Organization, within the last few years, I would say within the last 5 years, would have created a list of pesticides using 8 criteria, which are known as highly hazardous pesticides. Those criteria are very, very impactful when we review pesticides to ensure that the pesticides that we have registered in Trinidad and Tobago are safe for use. We are also using that HHP list of criteria for the review of pesticides that have been registered over the years and looking to see where we can remove those from registration or create a mitigation plan to allow them to be used under special circumstances. So with regards to regenerative agriculture, I would say the board has been assisting in ensuring that we have safer pesticides because we would register pesticides based on their toxicity classes. And of course, the safer ones would belong to toxicity class 4, which are the ones that are recommended for safe agricultural practices in agriculture.
Chair, I have a follow-up question based on that answer, please.
Sure, member.
Couldn't anybody from the ministry or health or agriculture tell us in the last, let's say, 10 years, using the criteria that you've described, about how many chemicals, if any, have been removed from the list of approved chemicals based on that criteria that has been developed and that you describe as being very stringent? So that's one. And secondly, apart from looking at these criteria and so on, and what may be harmful, are we pursuing an aggressive policy? Is it the policy of the Inspectorate now to pursue more environmentally friendly and organic pesticides for approval for use within Trinidad and Tobago, and to phase out those which are considered to not be organic, as described by the Ministry of Agriculture in their submission?
The Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Control Board, since we've been very active with the conventions, would have phased out quite a number of pesticides. I would say within the last 6 years, we would have phased out 9 of those that were deemed severely hazardous. And we have been reviewing at least 109 of them, which can be at some point in time either deregistered or have a mitigation plan developed for them. We did have some that are currently being reviewed at the ministry, which the board would have submitted a recommendation for in terms of a phase out. So those are being actively looked at, and those are 4 new active ingredients. However, with regards to organic pesticides, I think we need to be careful, because when we talk about organic pesticides, we also need to understand that it doesn't mean that those pesticides are totally safe. When we looked at the list of HHP criteria, we have actually found that there were a number of pesticides listed as class 4, and some of those which are also considered as organically sound to pose harm in some way to human health. So our review would actually look at the criteria listed, look at the international best practice in terms of managing those pesticides, and then, of course, charting a way forward for them. But definitely, we have been supporting the role of the registration of the safer groups of pesticides for use in agriculture in Trinidad.
Just one final question, Chair, very brief question.
Sure.
If the board could just tell us, do you have a time? You mentioned 109 on the review right now. Do you have a time frame in mind for completing that review process? And as well as you said, some you have made recommendations already and that are being looked at. If you could just give us a time frame and an idea of how long that process may take, and when do you anticipate that process may be finished with the 109 that you have identified?
We are currently actively reviewing those every board meeting. So we have 4 board meetings for the year, as we would have indicated, and 4 technical review committee meetings. So we have been adding in a certain quantity of those at every meeting for review of the 109. We've also been looking at the decisions being taken at the chemical review committee meeting of the Rotterdam Convention. So if we have any of those that are listed in Trinidad for use and they are being reviewed there, of course, we would look at the decision guidance documents coming out from those meetings to help us in our decision. I would want to indicate as well that the ones that we have already submitted to the Ministry of Health, they have already gone through a full review. So it's really a formality and an information to the ministry and of course to the minister before we make a proclamation. So that is it's very soon, and I can say within the next month or so, there will be a public announcement of those that are present at the ministry at this time.
Okay, thank you very much.
No, guide me again in this. The list you had given the Ministry of Health is a list of products to be deregistered.
The list that we would have provided to the committee would have been the list of registered pesticides in Trinidad and Tobago.
I think our committee got that, a list of pesticides. Okay. Now, following up Senator Lakshmi Dayal's question. You know, she's looking at, you know, the fact that you meet 4 times to discuss any sort of emergency situations or continuing assessment. At one stage in 1995, I think the United Nations had claimed there was what they called a dirty dozen, where they looked at a group of 12 highly persistent toxic chemicals. And I want to just name them: the aldrin, chlordane, DDT, dieldrin, endrin, heptachlor, hexachlorobenzene, Mirex, polychlorinated, biphenyls, polychlorinated, dibenzo P-dioxins, polychlorinated, dibenzoflurans, and toxafen. Many of those pesticides in this group are no longer used for agricultural purposes in the developed countries. However, they are still being used in developing countries. Are any from this, what we refer to as the dirty dozen, which actually increased, because after that, they looked at carcinogenic polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PHAs, and certain brominated flame retardants, as well as organometallic compounds such as tributylene, which they added to this list of dirty dozen. So our question, of those mentioned, are any of those still in use in Trinidad and Tobago? And why I ask this is because I remember it took us 18 years to deregister and ban DDT from Trinidad and Tobago in 1990. Yet in 1972, the US EPA issued a cancellation order due to its adverse environmental effects. So we need to know a timeline. You get a warning, this is banned in the States or Europe, how soon after you review and make recommendations? And those that I mentioned, are any of those still in use in Trinidad and Tobago?
Yeah, yes, Chair. No, none of them are in use in Trinidad and Tobago. That list that you would have identified as the list of dirty dozen, that list was the initial list under the Stockholm Convention. As you rightly said, that list has been expanded, and all the pesticides under the Stockholm Convention with regards to Trinidad and Tobago has been deregistered. The most recent ones being endosulfan and aldicarb and a couple others that were added to the list. What we have also done, Chair, is we are looking as well as at the candidate chemicals and the candidate pesticides that are to be reviewed by the POPROC committee. That's the committee under the Stockholm Convention. And we are being proactive in terms of taking decisions if it is that we have to, if it is that we have them in Trinidad and Tobago registered, what should we do in terms of having them deregistered? The mere fact that they would have been recommended as a candidate chemical, it means therefore that it requires some sort of national action and not wait for the POPROC to declare that, okay, we are going to ban or put it on the list of the dirty dozen.
So are you saying that if we see there's a problem in one of the developed countries and it's banned, there's still a delay, a time lag to ban it here? Is it that we can fast track it? And what I make reference to, I know there's something called Roundup, which were found to, it's a weed herbicide, and it's found to have it's a glyphosate. And in the United States, it was suggested that it would have caused, and evidence showed, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a cancer of the immune system. And the latest information, it can also cause thyroid cancer. And the fact is, there was a ban on these chemicals up there, and legal action also have been taken into the companies that make it. So in terms of like Roundup, is it still available here? And if so, is there any way that we can explore fast tracking it, since it has been causing havoc in terms of the health of cancer, causing immune system problems?
Chair, with regards to Roundup and glyphosate, the decision that the board would take would be based on decision taken by regulatory bodies and bodies of science. So in the United States, the US EPA still has the product glyphosate and Roundup registered. It has not been deregistered, and no national action in terms of deregistration has taken place. Likewise, EFSA in the European Union glyphosate continues to be registered in the European Union for use. And as well as when we look at the report coming out from the International Cancer Research Agency, they have issued statements with regards to it. However, they have clearly indicated that there was really no link to cancer being caused in humans by the use of glyphosate, right? We also look, like I said, to the Chemical Review Committee of the Rotterdam and the POPRA Committee of the Stockholm Convention to support any decision that we will make, thereby ensuring that we have a scientific basis and a sound basis for the decisions that the Pesticide and Toxic Chemicals Control Board will take. However, we continue to remain very cognizant to the fact that there are issues surrounding the use of it globally. And once we attain that information in terms of the science or from the regulatory bodies, we will definitely take an immediate step to remove it from registration once it's decided.
So in August 2018, a US judge ordered Monsanto, which sells the Roundup, to pay $289 million in damages to certain litigants. This award was subsequently reduced to $78 million. Now, the question is, if we are seeing something in the legal field arena in the developed nations, that can happen here. Is the Ministry of Agriculture or Ministry of Health legal department looking at any sort of repercussions that could come about if local persons here decide to take legal actions against your relevant departments for still having it here? Is that something your legal departments are looking into?
Chair, I'll let my legal advisor respond to that from the Ministry of Health, please.
Hi, good morning again, everyone. Unfortunately, no, that is not something that we would normally look at. While we might be cognizant of legal proceedings internationally and regionally in terms of public health, we would not actively make recommendations in this regard, because we will await the recommendations of the duly appointed body, which would be the Registrar Toxic Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Board, and their recommendations, which we expect would be premised on, as Mr. Ali would have indicated, what is the international recommendation coming through these governing bodies. And only based on those policy decisions, then, I hope that answers the question, Chairman.
Well, yes, it's just to be prepared for it. But remember, even in the States, when DDT came around, it took years after when environmentalists drew concern about the effects of it. Then the government there took action. So there may always be that delay. But I want to ask this question. The dustband, cricket bait, knockout, and the chlorpyrifos chemical. That chemical, it has, I think it was on the 18th of August, 2021, the Biden administration banned the use of this chemical in agricultural production due to the risk it posed to children and workers, risks as causing neurological damage. And we've seen there are a lot of neurological damages that occur in developmental problems in children, as Dr. Parasam would know, being in charge of the health sector there. And what I'm saying is, if this was so in the Biden administration, we have seen neurological disorders increasing. We have seen there may be a link with this and Parkinson. And also, I'm trying to find out, is this chemical banned in Trinidad or is it still available?
Chlorpyrifos, all chlorpyrifos products are banned in Trinidad. It has been banned for at least the last 10 years. We would have taken a decision to ban chlorpyrifos way back then because of a report coming out of the US EPA, which showed that it was causing neurological damage in children and in unborn children as well. So that information was used to have all chlorpyrifos products deregistered.
So I thank you for that. So it seems that we are down here a little ahead of the US Biden administration's ban. So congratulations for that. I want to find out the fact that you are doing like testing on residual pesticides and herbicides on products. I mean, how often is this done? Testing on products. Do you have a sample that you may go into the market? You may go and just decide, let's pick up a sample of your products. Let's go to the different vendors and to test to see randomly what the population is exposed to. Do you do that random testing?
Mr. Ali, did you hear the question? I'm not sure if your connection picked it up.
Well, I was looking at random testing for like residual chemicals in the like fruits and in terms of, you know, agricultural products. You may go by a vendor. Some people may claim they are smelling something, chemicals in it. Recently, there was something on social media where somebody showed they cut open some product and there was a yellow substance leaching out, and they said that was really to kill snails. And it was there in social media. So the question is, do you do random checks? That's the first question on vendors to see on their produce if there's a high amount of residual pesticides in it?
Yes, sir. No, sir. Unfortunately, we do not do random testing. It is not current. It is not an area that the Inspectorate is currently engaged in. And it has to be as a result of the fact that the legislation does not allow us that remit to collect samples and do random testing on them.
Okay, so then this is something we need to explore in the legislation to give the powers to the Inspectorate. The other thing is too, if somebody suspects that there's a contaminant in their produce that they buy, could they bring it to you to get testing done?
They can definitely engage the Pesticides Inspectorate, and we can then direct them in terms of how they can get the testing done and where they can get the testing done to provide a report back. However, you know, it's something that, again, legislation would have to also be enacted to ensure that we can pursue additional action beyond that.
So what advice would you give someone who gets buys a product and suspects it may be contaminated via the smell or how it looks? Is there any avenue that person could go for testing, could go elsewhere to find out, is there a safe level of pesticide? Is there anything there that probably not through your ministry, but an individual could explore that option to decide? Because you see, if an individual discovers this, then they might be able to relay that information to your department. And then if so, would you be able to take action? So it's two questions here. Do they have private testing facilities for individuals? And also, if you now have a private sort of a lab acknowledging that's a high dose, would you then, for the safety of the population, be able to source where that came from and put some sort of action? Is that something you all could do, or do you need further legislative powers to do that?
Okay, with regards to the first question on testing, we can direct them to Kariri or to the ministry, to the University of the West Indies Chemistry Department, as well as there are opportunities within the region through regional laboratories to have the product tested as well. So there are opportunities for testing, but there's also the fact that we need to remember that pesticides do not carry one value. For every pesticide used on a crop, it's a different test and it's a different value. So it would definitely be something that they would have to be guided by the laboratory to have done. Okay. With regards to, yes, legislation, that's an area that would have to be developed in terms of pesticide residue testing and analysis in Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you. Member Webster Roy would have a question now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I also saw that that post on social media, and I wanted to ask some questions around because I was very much concerned. In terms of public education and sensitization, how often is there outreach with the farming community to ensure that they are kept up to date in terms of how they should mix or shouldn't mix chemicals, how long they should wait before they put something in the marketplace? Also, how often do you engage the public in terms of information so that the general public could understand what to do if they purchase something and they suspect that it might be contaminated, or what avenue they could explore to get some kind of guidance if they suspect that somebody within the community might be farming and releasing harmful chemicals into the environment?
Thank you. Chair, if I may, I'll let Mr. Ali speak about the public education part of it, and then I will defer to my colleagues at agriculture with regard to the sensitization with the farmers. Thank you, Mr. Ali.
Okay, thank you. So the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Control Board every year would observe Pesticides Awareness Week at the end of September. That's the usual time, in collaboration with the Caribbean, the Coordinating Group of Pesticides Control Board of the Caribbean. And that week is geared towards sensitizing the general public, the farming community, etc., with regards to the safe use and handling and distribution and disposal of pesticides. So that is observed every year by the Ministry of Health, and we at times would do it specifically to farmers, as well as we would do it to the general public at other times. We are also very supportive and engageful with some of our international and regional partners through their various projects in working with farmers and farming groups in terms of ensuring that they understand the safe use and distribution of pesticides. And we also work with our Ministry of Agriculture, the Extension Services in their programs to help in sharing information with regards to the safe use, distribution, and disposal of pesticides as well.
Before the Ministry of Agriculture goes on, Mr. Chairman, please permit me. Do you have a social media presence? Are you on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, engaging public outside of that week? Because to be honest, I didn't really know of you until I got the information for this JSC. So, I mean, if I don't know, how many more persons in the wider public don't know of you and your work?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. So, remember, the inspector doesn't have a separate social presence. They're part of the Ministry of Health's social media presence. But I do take the suggestion that more can be done to highlight the work of the Inspectorate within our various social media channels. So I do take that recommendation as well.
Okay, thank you.
You see, but it still alarms me that if someone suspects that there's a contaminated food source, what, is it the population is helpless? What avenues are there for that person to not just seek redress, but to protect other citizens? In terms of having this spot checks that I mentioned, and the ability to actually, is there any ability to or powers to, if a farmer sprays a product and brings it out before a timeline, sprays it right away and starts to sell it, is there anything in law, and probably the attorney in the ministry may be able to help, that you are now putting the public at risk by spraying something and not leaving adequate time for that to disperse? Is there anything in law that that you are giving that public and safe product out there? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, was that the Ministry of Health or the Ministry of Agriculture?
The Ministry of Health, which I think the Inspectorate would fall under, where we are looking to see somebody brings in a product there. Is there anything in law to go after these individuals to say you are now putting the public at risk? Any of the attorneys in their department could probably give some sort of answer with this.
So, Chairman, there are general provisions under the legislation in terms of the registration of the pesticide and recommendations that come forward in terms of the use. I'm not sure that there is a direct mechanism for Ministry of Health to take action. I'm not sure if there's anything that agriculture can do outside of our health legislation, that is.
So therefore, we need to develop then some powers for the Inspectorate, and also some sort of punitive measures for farmers who may breach the recommendations that are given to them. But I have a question here too, because even though I understand that we do the educational drive in the pesticide day a week, sometimes you still find that persons out there, even persons who may know better to be handling these chemicals properly. Have you noticed that the farmers themselves have had problems in their health when they are handling these chemicals? You see, why I'm asking this question is at a meeting on the Pesticide Week 2022, which was mentioned, a recent survey found that 47% of 208 farmers spread across Trinidad and Tobago felt unwell over the past 12 months within 24 hours of pesticide application. The survey was conducted by Durasamy Sarah Van Kumar, Professor and Head Department of Food Production, Faculty of Food of Agriculture in UWI, St. Augustine, in conjunction with the Food and Agriculture Organization. So therefore, we have occupational poison still occurring, and it's occurring by persons who should know better. These are farmers who would have been probably using these chemicals. And is it a sense that you're accustomed using it and you just say what? You may decide to not be as vigilant as before. But these are farmers who should know better. So even though we are trying to appeal to the public, we still find that the farmers themselves may be in need of further education. And so do you have, as I say, any ways of checking the farmers to see that they are having the proper protective gear on? Because there were cases where it was mentioned that sometimes the farmers may hire the immigrant workers, and you may find that there may be a shortcomings in giving them the personal protective gear to use. And is there any way that we can check on the farmers who themselves seems to be a little deficient in their caution in applying these chemicals, and also in the workers there? Is there any sort of requirement that the OSH would have to say, we can go in and look at these persons working for the farmers and ensure that there's some safety? Because remember, if those individuals get illness, it's the Ministry of Health will now have that burden now to treat these individuals. So could someone elaborate if there's any sort of ways of checking workers also and the farmers, educational towards the farmers themselves who seem to be deficient from this report?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. I'll let my colleague at the Ministry of Agriculture speak to that issue, please, with regard to the farmers. Thank you.
Okay, the ministry will speak specifically with what we do with respect to sensitization With respect to any health problems, of course, we will ask our colleagues from the Ministry of Health to address this. So the Ministry of Agriculture has recognized that, as we said, judicious use of the available pesticides or chemicals is very important. So we have our extension officers that will do some continuous education with farmers. When we do training courses, we have scheduled, structured training courses. Our, if you want to call it, our students or our clients are also educated on it. I also want to indicate that NAMDEFCO, which is also, while not core ministry, under the ministry, has actually developed good agricultural practices, a booklet of good agricultural practices that will guide the farmers, and this is currently being rolled out. They have over 3,000 registered farmers, and they do some monitoring of the farmers and their judicious use of chemicals and other aspects of it. So that's how the ministry has addressed and has tried to sensitize and educate some of our stakeholders with respect to judicious use of chemicals.
But according to this report, there's still some failings. And is it that should we now develop a situation where farmers could only get their pesticides and herbicides at dedicated shops where they will now be re-educated whenever they go in to buy it? Just as our pharmacists, when they dispense medication, may tell you about the side effects. You go to dedicated places and not just go to a hardware and pick up these things. So dedicated places where they'll be able to say, listen, yes, you're a farmer, you've been there for years, but this is what will happen. This is the effect on the environment. This is the effect of the on the children and the biodiversity. Is it that we may have to look at dedicated places which can give this information, as well as when they are dispersing this, when they are giving out the selling the pesticides? So do you think this is something that we could look into?
We think there are different ways of doing it. One would be certified operators, which I believe that's what you're alluding to. Another thing that they do in other countries is that they actually give farmers an examination, and only those who have passed the examination can actually have access to chemicals, and use it. So there are different ways that this can be done, and we believe that it can be entertaining and it can be explored, because we do recognize that there is some concern out there in our population.
Well, again, this is excellent, because you see now we are looking for certified places which can divulge that information as a reminder, one, and then testing of farmers. So again, these are things we could explore in our recommendations, because our recommendations really would be to protect our environment, to protect our farmers. And I am glad you were able to bring up these 2 points that we were pushing there, and then we've got it in a nice way there. I think our member, Maurice Julian, would like to ask a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Ministry of Health. We are hearing all about the crops and the impact of the chemicals, but what is the status of the construction and outfitting of the environmental laboratory? Because of course we will have to get this tested.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So with regard to our laboratory, as you know, it has been down for a number of years. We're currently completed all the renovations. We have applied for our statutory approvals, OSH, fire, what have you. We expect to get those during the month of February. And once we get those, our lab will then reopen. But let me just say, Chair, again, through you, there are numerous laboratories within that building. So we're going to be opening those labs on a phased basis. I can let my colleagues at the Chemistry, Food and Drug Division just speak about which labs we're going to be opening first and what are we doing in the interim to provide those services outside of our in-house laboratory. Mr. Ali, you just want to touch on the second part of it, please? Thank you.
Okay. Again, through you, Chair, what we've been doing with regards to pesticides being imported into Trinidad and for a verification purpose, feeling that the laboratory is still, under construction, and as Pierre said, would soon to be open. We've been getting from the countries that export those pesticides into our region certificate of analysis, and we've been cross-referencing those certificates with the various countries that export them to Trinidad to verify that the quality of products that come in are safe for use and as registered in Trinidad and Tobago. Right?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a follow-up question regarding this.
Sure.
So through the chair, according to the second report of the Joint Select on Finance and Legal Affairs, the Ministry of Health stated in its ministerial response that the, and I quote, CFDD laboratory facility would require upgrading and the analysis required further training to enable the CFDD to conduct the full range of pesticides residue analysis for the types of pesticides that are present in agricultural produce in Trinidad and Tobago. Why was this type of testing facilities not included in the initial scope of the works of the new chemistry, food and drugs lab?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just let my colleagues at the Chemistry Food and Drug Divisions respond, please. Thanks.
PS and Chair, with your permission, what I can say is in terms of the prioritization of the lab, we did focus primarily on the food lab as well as the microbiological lab. Those two labs were seen as being necessary at that point in time in terms of the quantity of goods that are imported and manufactured locally. So the decision was to look at those two labs first. However, we're focusing now on the environment lab as well as the toxicology lab and also the drug lab. So that was the reason why we focus on micro and food, and then the other decision is to focus as well on drug and environment. And we do have equipment within the environment lab that has the ability to do some of the testing that were mentioned earlier. And we hope that when that lab is operational as phase 2, that we would get starting in terms of doing some of those analyses that are deemed critical.
Chair, if I may just add to what Mr. Khan just mentioned, and Mr. Ali touched on it earlier, we do place assurance and reliance on those other stringent regulatory authorities with regard to the certificate of manufacturing that he spoke about for any new products being registered in the country. So there is a level of due diligence taking place to ensure the safety and the chemical composition of those products coming in. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Through the chair, the point is, Mr. Ali, is that we also want to focus on, as you know, we have a huge trust on agriculture, on the local produce. So that is why we were inquiring about the initial scope. And I'm happy to hear from Mr. Khan that it's now going. And let me make it clear again, please, Mr. Khan. You're making it clear that this is now the new direction with the chemistry and the food and drugs lab, the environmental lab. Just for clarity, please, for the record.
Okay, so in terms of the phase 2 of the project, yes, the environment lab is scoped for second phase of the project.
And again, through the chairman, just to ask once more, when is phase 2? Is it now? Is it next week? Is it next year? We would like to know. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Chair, so phase 2 would be dependent upon the lab actually getting started. As I said, we've applied for the necessary approvals. All things being equal, we expect this to commence operations at phase 1 shortly thereafter. So remember, I can give you a time, but it will be dependent upon getting the approvals and making sure we have those approvals in place. We expect to get it, right? We've done all the work needed. So once we get those approvals, we start with phase 1. And we have actually started the planning for phase 2 in terms of whether we need to acquire any additional equipment or any protocols. That has started. So it's not that we're waiting on phase 1 to then begin planning for that phase 2. That planning and preparation has already started.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Member Hislop has a question, Senator.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to commend the Inspectorate on the work that they've been doing over the years. But I want to find out if there's a challenge in Trinidad and Tobago with contraband chemicals, chemicals and pesticides. Do we have a challenge with that, and how are we treating from the Inspectorate point of view? How are we treating to counteract that if there is a challenge?
Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Hislop, and Chair, through you. Over the years, the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Inspectorate has been very engageful in terms of all shipments coming into Trinidad and Tobago and the inspection of those shipments. We, apart from inspecting the shipments when they come in, it's a twofold operation. Of course, it's the documentation part where we would look at those documents submitted through customs, and then the physical inspection of the shipments when they arrive here in the country for verification purposes. There's also the monitoring on the field that the Inspectorate will have done and continues to do to ensure that the products that are on the shelf complies with the legislation. So they are all registered, they are labeled in accordance with the regulations, etc., that are being sold. From time to time, if we do find some, it's not really agricultural, so we don't see agricultural pesticides being an issue. We may find some issues with some of the household products being imported from certain countries. And of course, the idea then is to seize and remove or seize and detain those chemicals. I would just want to add that in 2016, because of the vigilance of the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Inspectorate, and with the fact that we would have been partnering with the FAO on a project, Trinidad and Tobago was able to export 87 tons of pesticides, expired and contraband, from the country for disposal. Okay, so thank you very much for the question.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. Just a follow-up, Chairman. Do we use chemicals in Trinidad and Tobago, or are there chemicals in use in Trinidad and Tobago that are not used internationally, or that are banned internationally?
We do not have chemicals that are registered for use in Trinidad and Tobago that are banned under the Stockholm Convention, that are banned or listed under the Rotterdam Convention. We may have chemicals that may not be used in some countries due to their special circumstances. But of course, like I said previously, we are guided by the bodies of science and by the conventions that we've signed on to in order to protect our citizens.
Okay. And my final follow-up in this regard, Mr. Chairman, there is an issue between monitoring the use of chemicals and the importation. So the Inspectorate is able to manage effectively what comes into the country. And if I want to follow up from Member Webster Roy, when it comes to pesticides in use by farmers, is it a manpower issue why the Inspectorate cannot or is unable to? If I'm wrong, you could correct me. Why the Inspectorate is unable to treat with the pesticides in the field in terms of meeting the farmers to find out what they're using and to make sure that they are using them correctly.
I think it's a more than just that. The Ministry of Agriculture, of course, is that arm that would interact with the farmers directly and through the extension services to determine from the farmers what they are using and of course provide that recommendation. So I could ask if I can defer the question to the Ministry of Agriculture for their input as well.
Sure, no problem.
Yes, so all the pesticides which are registered by the board are available on the open market and are accessible to all farmers, but to the extent of use, no formal surveys were current to guide that answer.
So, Mr. Chairman, the challenges that we may be facing in terms of what Minister or what Member Roy would have mentioned in with regards to produce having particular smells and residue. How can we say for sure that we are consuming safe produce in terms of the chemical, the pesticide usage at the farm? How is that regulated? So if I go to purchase, let's say, a cabbage, how can I be sure that what the farmer is using is safe and is within the withdrawal period and all of that? How could I be? What assurances could I have as a consumer?
Sila.
Yeah, I think that answer probably might be better from Ministry of Health, but also the quantity of pesticides which are imported can give some guide as to what is demanded on the local market as well. You know, so some surveys were done by UWE at Dr. Sarah. I think that was mentioned by the chairman. But a lot more needs to be done to get that data outside there. But the factor about contamination of produce and safety to consumers is directly linked to ability to test the produce.
Right, and I think that is, Mr. Chairman, I think that may be one of the challenges I'm having in that we are unable to effectively test the produce so that consumers can be comfortable in purchasing produce, because the reality is that some farmers may use, I guess, I wouldn't say excessive, but they may use more chemicals at a closer time to reaping to make sure that the produce looks good to the consumer. But then when the consumer purchases, one, it doesn't last long in storage, and then two, you have a challenge with the level of chemicals within the produce. So, yeah.
Yes, member. So we realize that there's a shortcoming there, there's a gap there that we may need to address by legislation, given more powers, give the tested powers, and probably even, I don't know, Bureau of Standards may have a part to play in it in terms of, will they, I mean, we'll have to look at the adequate testing and powers to the Inspectorate and how we can hold persons responsible if you are given the public products that are produced that is probably beyond the levels of the pesticide, acceptable levels. But what was mentioned?
Sorry, Chair. Sorry,
sure.
I do apologize, Chair, if I may just to maybe just maybe add the ministry's perspective on this. So fully agreed. I would defer to Mr. Ali to speak about the issue of testing. I don't want us to leave here thinking that there is no testing capacity within the country or no testing capacity available with regard to produce or any other food stuff. I'll let Mr. Ali speak a bit more about that. It may not be resident in the ministry right now, but that doesn't mean there is an absence of testing capacity. That's one. The other one, and I let Ms. Paulessa maybe just touch on it. We, as we said before, we work closely with the Ministry of Agriculture. We provide technical support. In terms of legislation and legislative review, I would refer to the legal experts in terms of whether there exists in legislation under the Ministry of Agriculture any provision for what we are speaking about. While we recognize there's some need to review our legislation, it may already exist in another agency. I'm not too sure. All right. And again, the Ministry of Health stands willing to work with any agency that has that to provide our technical support and input to make that a reality. Thank you.
So PS, if I may add to what you just said, and Chairman, if you'll allow me. So food safety and responsible pesticide use requires really a whole of government and a whole of society approach to dealing with it. It is not a one agency show. Really and truly, food safety starts at the beginning. You go farm to fork all the way through, and there are a number of steps in which there can be slips, there can be mistakes. In terms of the Ministries of Health remit, we have to ensure through our legislation and through the Pesticides Toxic Chemical Act that the importation of pesticides into the country is appropriate and is aligned to the international conventions in Stockholm and Rotterdam, which is what Mr. Ali had elaborated quite a lot about in the first instance. So as it comes into the country, we have a significant role. We also have a role as it relates to training beyond farming, training for use. We have a role as it relates to inspection of premises for storage, and I think the chairman alluded to that. So there is a role for saying who can and can't sell pesticides in the country. And there's a major role for the Ministry of Health in terms of public education as it relates to food safety. When you speak about buying produce, for example, you're buying sweet peppers, for example, before you use it, there is, of course, through the Public Health Inspectorate and through the chief nutritionist, there would have been a number of public health, social media involvement as well from the Ministry of Health to say basically how to prepare it properly, how to wash it properly. A lot of these pesticides, although they may be toxic and although they may have residue, luckily they dissolve very easily in water. So appropriate washing and use falls under the remit of the ministry as a line item, but it requires a whole of government and a whole of society. And I think Chairman touched on TTPS as one stakeholder. Ministry of Agriculture, of course, is our partner in this. But generally, I think to deal with food safety and appropriate pesticide use in Trinidad and Tobago, we really need to have that whole of government, whole of society team working together.
Thank you, Dr. Parasram. And I appreciate the fact that, remember, it also, we know that the pesticides, their misuse could have developmental changes, damage to central peripheral nervous systems, disruption of endocrine, reproductive immune systems. And a study published in 2006 suggests that an increased levels of it in the blood serum is linked with diabetes. And we know your ministry has a lot of impetus into trying to help our situation in the country because the diabetic population is high here. So therefore, we are identifying the gaps, we are identifying things, and the whole object of this morning is to see where we can now empower the Inspectorate and the other departments to see how we can get a better hold on this. And so I would like to also make mention that Ms. Morris Julian would also have a question to pose.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Chairman, this is directed to the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries. It was stated that the Trinidad and Tobago Standard for Good Agricultural Practice, Fresh Produce Requirements, was developed in 2020 by the NAMDEVCO and the Bureau of Standards. So I'm very interested in A, what aspects of these standards relate to the use of pesticides and chemicals by farmers? And B, how does the ministry monitor the use of standards by the farmers? Chairman, it is directed to the Ministry of Agriculture, please.
Yes, in the development of the GAP standard, there was contributions from Ministry of Health as well as Ministry of Agriculture. And regard to your first question there about concerning pesticide use on the GAP standard, one was the guidelines on labeling, pesticide labeling, and I think in addition to the GAP standard, I think Mr. Ali could probably mention on the regional standard for pesticide labeling as well. But the GAP standard, labeling is an important component on how guiding on how pesticides should be used in the best manner to reduce contamination produced in the environment and safety to the environment and so on. And another important component there would be the pre-harvest interval, the time between when you can apply a pesticide and giving it enough time prior to harvest, so that you reduce the risk to the consumer in that regard. So there were other components as well that dealt directly with pesticide use in the GAP standard. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Surely, Chairman, it's not quite what it is I was expecting to hear. But the monitoring of the use of the standards by farmers, how can we be assured? Now, truly, Chairman, I keep asking these questions because, like everyone else, I have concerns about what comes into my home, about cancer, and I would really like to know what is the process that takes place to ensure that the farmers are using these certain standards.
So in addition to the GAP document, the ministry provides a diagnostic service to the farming community. And in that regard, farmers that have concerns with pest problems are guided, first of all, to diagnose the problem, and then recommendations are based on the need for applying pesticides and the type of pesticides which can be used and also when it should be used, so that it can be effective and also be used in a safe way to protect human health, applicator health, and the environment.
Sure, the Chairman again. So is this mandatory? If, for example, I'm a farmer and I do not call you for advice or support, how is it that the Ministry of Agriculture is looking into the standards and the practices?
So which standards are you referring to?
I'm talking about with the pesticides in particular and the chemicals. So if I am a large-scale farmer and I'm not, are you all coming to check? Are you visiting? Are there field officers?
Yes, so
that's what I'm trying to get at. Thank you.
Under the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, there are different divisions. So you have the country divided into 2 regions, and under each region, you have county offices, and under the county offices, you have districts. And for each district, there are officers that are responsible for the farmers in that community. So that's one aspect, one division. And so they will actually go out and advise farmers routinely. And they also have the office where farmers can come in as well. So that's one. And they also engage. So pesticide use is important. Pest control is an important aspect of their program of work. And safety and use of pesticides is also important in their work program. But also you have the Extension and Training Information Services Division, which has scheduled training activities that are advertised in the media. And they also have programs for safe use of pesticide and for the applicator, the safe clothing and PP.
All right, I'm happy to hear that, because my concern was that I was hoping that this wasn't a scenario where a farmer could be doing what they want without somebody monitoring it. So you have assured me there are field officers who go out to each farm, correct? and we'll make sure that they're using.
Yes, all districts are covered, all areas are covered under the ministry.
All right, so through the chairman, I have one more question, one more follow-up question. With regard to the safe use and handling of pesticides, your submission indicated that the Ministry of Agriculture and the Inspectorate has collaborated on initiatives with the Agricultural Society of Trinidad and Tobago, Copper Foundation, the People for the People Foundation, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation and Agriculture. I would really appreciate, so with my colleagues, if you could give us some details on these initiatives and exactly what did they entail and when were they conducted and are there any in progress? Thank you.
Right. So with regards to that question, the Ministry of Agriculture and the Inspectorate would have collaborated with these foundations on the safe use of food, right? Together, one of the projects would have been the cooperation for the adaptation and resilience to climate change in the Caribbean. And one of the subgroup projects out of it was the Resilient School Feeding Program, which both was Ministry of Agriculture through LASCSA and the Inspectorate would have come up with guidelines and the way best to treat with regards to safe products that will be used by the food feeding program. I don't know if the Ministry of Health through Mr. Ali would have had more details with regards to the program itself, since they would link to the Inspectorate.
Okay, so if I could start with regards to some of the initiatives that were conducted with the Ministry of Agriculture. In 2019 and 2020, the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Inspectorate would have worked with the Extension, Training and Information Services of the Ministry of Agriculture to conduct training for agro shops in the various locations in Trinidad, South, Central, North, and Tobago. And it was an initiative to ensure that the agro shops were equipped with enough information to share with farmers when they come to purchase their pesticides and fertilizer. So that's one of the main initiatives that we would have done with the Ministry of Agriculture. With the FAO, since 2010, the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Inspectorate would have been very engageful in the project, the FAO JEF project on sustainable pesticide management. So there are 5 components to that project where we would have been working with the FAO, both locally and regionally, to ensure that we develop a life cycle management system for pesticides in Trinidad under the various components. With regards to the Copper Foundation, we have done extensive work with the Inter-American agent, with AICA, to ensure that farmers are trained in the safe use of pesticides. And that it was done on twofold. One of it was actually to assist farmers and farming groups and developing farmers so that they could have safer food being produced, not only with pesticides, but of course with microbial contamination, to ensure that we had safer food being produced for sales. And it was really to encourage the small farmers in the country. The other project with regards to the P4P Foundation, that's an ongoing project. That project would have started last year, where the P4P Foundation would have been looking at empty pesticide containers to ensure that these empty containers are treated properly and then recycled. Now, there is a global issue with the export of plastics out of developing countries to developed countries and vice versa. And that has really crippled countries in terms of exporting their plastic waste. So countries are now being forced to develop mechanisms to ensure that these plastics are recycled or reused within the country. So the P4P Foundation, they are actually doing that initial pilot project to show that there is a sustainable use for these empty containers after the pesticides have been used and the containers have been cleaned properly. Right? One last thing that the Pesticide Board has been very engageful with, and we are very proud of this initiative, it's the fact that we are working with the NTA, the National Training Agency, to develop occupational standards for pesticide applicators and the agro shops, so that there can be sustainable training through a TTNVQ program for persons to become qualified to be able to apply pesticides properly. We recognize the fact that what we call the unskilled and the skilled and semi-skilled workers, who are the ones who really work on the ground, are the ones requiring that training. That standard is due to be completed within the next 2 months. So the NTA has been very helpful in developing that standard in collaboration with the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Control Board and the Ministry of Health.
Well, I appreciate the training given to the farmers, but the report I stated earlier still shows that somehow the farmers are not are still being exposed. So I think we need to put a greater trust into this. And I like Dr. Titus's suggestion that probably when the farmers come in to buy their products, we do testing on them and also their workers to ensure that proper procedures are being done. And as you mentioned, containers, there was the Auburn University Associate Professor, Ashiba Ababe, who revealed that he looked at the disposal of the containers, as you were mentioning, and there was a study in Jamaica where he looked at the disposal of the containers, and it was found that 49% of farmers burned their empty containers, 26% buried their containers, and 18% dumped them in bushes. And so therefore, the fact that the disposal of the containers are very important in terms of, just leave it there, it goes in the environment, it can lead to some sort of pollutants also leaching in. Now, I have always wondered, if you are buying these poisons in a glass bottle, those glass bottles could be easily broken and contaminate the area. And we have also run the limit where we are now moving away from plastics. And I'm looking, could it be a good suggestion to have the glass bottles, but have it styrofoam wrapped? So therefore, you're getting the best of both worlds. And so is that a suggestion that might be amenable, that you now would be having glass bottles protected with a styrofoam wrap and less chance of breakage? And I also want to know, you made mention that the chemicals that are that you have banned and other chemicals that you may need to ship out to be dispersed. Where do you ship these chemicals out? If you have some chemicals remaining that you need to get rid of, where do you ship it, and how much does it cost to do this? What I should say, the disbursement of this chemical to whatever facilities you may decide to carry to.
Okay, Chair, to answer the first question with regards to the glass bottles, we have been advocating that pesticides be not sold in glass bottles for the mere fact that those glass bottles can end up in trade. We have noticed when we have started way back in 99 and early 2000, there were lots of pesticides that were repackaged in alcohol bottles. And those bottles were then used by the farmers who would package milk in them for sale. And as a result of that, the decision of the board then was to get importers to move away from the use of these glass bottles because of the contamination that can occur if the bottle ends back up into the food trade, right? So what a lot of the importers have been using is co-extruded plastic bottles or fluorinated bottles, which are specifically designed for containing pesticides, right? So that's the first question. The other question with regards to the export of pesticides, those pesticides could only be exported if they are allowed to be exported under the Basel Convention. That's another convention that we are signed on to that deals with the transboundary movement of hazardous waste. So we need to fulfill the Basel Convention requirement to allow that transboundary movement. And the facilities where they are sent to must be facilities that are approved by the FAO for the disposal of pesticides. So in 2016, when Trinidad and Tobago exported the 87 tons, it was exported to a facility in the UK that was approved by the FAO for the disposal of the pesticides.
And do you have a cost? How much that cost the citizens?
Unfortunately, I do not have that cost at hand because it was done under the project.
But would that be something that will always be coming up in terms of not just the containers? So I understand what you say about the containers, but as I'm saying, we're looking at the balancing of the glass via plastics. So we have to get something there, and it's alarming that persons are reusing this, which we would have suspected. The fact is, the Inspectorate has the power to go into these areas and look at storage to ensure that the standards are met. So this is something that I felt comforted in. But then I want to ask a question. Is there, in your submissions, you stated that there are 3 vacant positions of Inspector 1. However, the Public Health Inspectorate and Food Drug Inspectorate provide support through monitoring and reporting. So what time frame has been determined for the commencement of the recruitment for the vacant post of Inspector 1? That's my first question. And the second question, what are some of the examples of public health inspectors detecting issues regarding the use of pesticides?
Thank you, Chair. I will answer the first question and I'll let Mr. Ali speak to the second question. The recruitment process has actually started, Chair. We are in the process of shortlisting applicants for that particular position. After shortlisting, it will be interviews. This is being done through the Public Service Commission because it is a public service post. But I am aware that shortlisting has started. And once that's finished, we move on to interviews afterwards. You'd appreciate, because it's a Public Service Commission post, I can't give you a time frame, but they are working with us to try to fill those posts as quickly as possible. I'll let Mr. Ali speak to the second question now. Thank you.
Thank you, PS and Chair. The Public Health Department has been the Inspectorate has been very, very supportive of the work done by the Pesticide Board, particularly in the area of complaints, right? Where persons would have applied pesticides and they would have affected the environment in some way, or affected neighbors in some way. They've been very supportive in terms of identifying those issues. They've also been very supportive at the fact that if they visit farming areas and they notice anything that is, for example, empty containers being thrown in a particular way, they've been reporting it to us in terms of what they've been seeing. And other miscellaneous items as it relates to pesticides. Even within the Insect Vector Control Division, there are areas within there that those persons who do that, those services have been communicating with us in terms of findings that they may find when they visit commercial establishments as well.
The chemicals that are used to be spraying for mosquitoes, that is there any sort of harm for those chemicals that are used? So members of the public may have had some concern that when they are coming around to spray, that there could be some harmful effects. Do you have anything you want to reassure the public on that?
The products used by the Insect Vector Control Division are products that are approved by the World Health Organization for use in vector control.
So if I may, so hazmat, going all the way back to, I think, 2015 or thereabouts, the insect vector control would have only used pesticides that was approved by the World Health Organization Pesticide Evaluation Scheme, which is called WOPES. So we would have looked primarily at getting everything else that were being used even way back before 2010 to ensure that we align fully to the WHO Pesticide Evaluation Scheme. And then, of course, there's the Pesticide Act, which gives us some buffering in terms of importation, and the Convention of Stockholm and Rotterdam at the front end of it. But certainly what we use is not only what is recommended, but certainly the types of chemicals that are recommended and used in the correct quantities, and therefore the necessary training that is done within the division for those officers that actually handle the chemicals occur very regularly, and we get assistance from the Chemistry, Food and Drug Division in that regard as well. And of course, hazmat, I think the Vector Control Division would have been a part of the disposal that occurred in 2016 as well. And we would have played a focal point role in getting those 87 tons disposed of safely and out of the country.
Thank you, CMO. And I appreciate the fact that I think you are responsible for getting our dengue situation under control. So I must thank you for that. I also, and thanks for reassuring the public that it's nothing that is being sprayed on them that may be having sort of a major ill effects. I would like to ask the fact, like doing testing. Now, there was a study done by Mr. Lakshman Lochan, an assessment of agrochemical residues in local produce and honey in Trinidad and Tobago. And a prior assessment of the agrochemical residues in agro products in Trinidad done in 1997 revealed the presence of organophosphates in approximately 10% of the produce sample. And a similar study in 2020 identified pesticide residue in approximately 60% of the sample. So it seems, even though there's an educational trust, even though there are NGOs coming on board, there are still now probably more use of it, and the fact that it's now an increase. And looking at that study, are any testing done on local honey, which will give us an idea about the contaminants to the bees? And also, is there any testing done in imported honey? Because I've noticed it was mentioned in the newspaper some time ago, honey came in from Venezuela and other CARICOM countries would have exported honey to us.
Just to clarify that at this point in time, Trinidad and Tobago does not allow imports, or I should say, we really should not legally import honey into Trinidad and Tobago at this point in time. You know, it's according to our legislation, the Beekeeping and Beekeepers Act. So how should I say, informal arrivals from South America and up the islands, we would have, it's just that it's illegal, and of course it will slip through the cracks, and we can't speak to those. Separate from that, generally there, at this point in time, regrettably, the Ministry of Agriculture does not do any testing for honey, but there are private labs in which testing can be provided.
So what we are looking for is recommendations, really, that what we need to improve. So if we find testing for honey, given more testing capabilities, all these are things we would like to include in the report that we would be producing. So any suggestions you have out there that could help us, to help you, to help the population, we welcome that. And also, I think I got a WhatsApp message just now that somebody bought a pesticide and it was really labeled in Spanish. So therefore, a question I need to know, if you find that it slipped in via the, it slipped in through the border, whatnot, and you get this, who do we report this to? Is it the Ministry of Agriculture, Bureau of Standards? I mean, who do we report if we see something that is not labeled in English, so there's no direction on it, and we may suspect, do we report it to Ministry of Agriculture? Could you give me a guidance on that?
With regards to the improperly labeled pesticide, it should be reported to the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Inspectorate, because it is specific under our importation regulations, and the regulations are there for the labeling. Yes.
Thank you. And in terms of we're looking at the fact that farmers would plant near a water source, and with the flooding we have been having, you may get spillover of their pesticides into the rivers, going to the sea. And we recently had the IMA come before us, this committee, and they looked at the fact that the marine life, the coral reef, all these things are being affected by the land misuse of pesticides. So in terms of the agricultural development, somebody is going to plant somewhere near river source. Has the Ministry of Agriculture given directives that that somehow that could mitigate against flooding out a land that has just been sprayed going into the river? Is there any way that the embankment suggestions for this to prevent this? Also, a liaison with the Ministry of Works to provide pumps at certain areas. Has there been any discussions along those that path?
Okay, so the Ministry of Agriculture does actually have pumps in certain stations to control flooding. But I understand what you're saying, that we need to manage it. And it's really, I would think, first of all, the need for policy development with respect to this will be important. We also have to take into consideration that we have a little paradoxical situation existing. Interestingly, the land that has been flooded is going to be the very fertile land. So is it that our policy would say that you can plant, let us say, I'm just hypothesizing here, let us say during the dry season, as opposed to during the rainy season, etc. So those things need to be worked out and developed in a policy in association with the water management and judicious pesticide use. So what I'm saying is there are many different factors that need to be considered, but I do support and endorse and strongly encourage that it is something that it will take, let us say, a multi-ministerial approach to developing a policy in going forward.
Sure, thank you. This is what we are looking for, suggestions on how we can mitigate against this. I would like to find out in terms of the classes of pesticide toxicity. I looked at the classes: 1A extremely toxic and it's red, 1B extremely toxic red, 2 highly toxic yellow, 3 toxic blue, and 4 and U slightly toxic green. What is the difference between 1A and 1B, which is extremely toxic?
Okay, so with regards to the toxicity, it is related to what we call the LD50, the half-life of the particular pesticide. And there is a value, so something that is between 5 to 50, you may want to classify that as a 1A pesticide. Lots of the fumigants that we use for fumigating shipments, etc., wooden crates and all of that would fall within that 1A category. Your agricultural pesticides, most of them would fall within that 1B category and would be associated with products such as carbamate type pesticides, etc. But it has to do with the LD50 and that would determine how toxic that particular pesticide is and the toxicity value.
Thank you. Mr. Senator Hislop has a question.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to for a follow-up question here. In the list, it says the submission stated that the board is responsible for the importation and monitoring of the sale and use of toxic chemicals. In this regard, the ministry is concerned with the need for stricter monitoring of the use of chemicals and the adherence in agricultural production to the stated guidelines on use. The question is, how feasible would it be to incorporate the monitoring and enforcement of the use of chemicals and pesticides by farmers into the functions of the inspectorate?
The use of pesticides is something that that is covered under the legislation in terms of the act, and it's regulations that needs to be promulgated to ensure that the usage of pesticide is covered. Of course, it's an area that again, as Dr. Titus indicated, it is not just an area that is governed by the Pesticides Inspectorate, but there are lots of other areas, for example, training and development, etc., that goes into ensuring that the farmer who is using the pesticide is well trained to do so. And of course, the monitoring part of it, which then takes over to ensure that what he has been trained to do he continues doing it in accordance with the legislation.
But where to you, Mr. Chairman, but where are we where that is concerned right now? Is it being done? Is it in the making?
The Ministry of Health has developed or has been working on a draft sustainable pesticide management policy. And that within that policy, there is mention of various pieces of legislation, regulations in particular, that would need to be promulgated to address various issues under the legislation, under the Act.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for now.
I wanted to inquire about the fact that if I had mentioned before of the chlorpyrifos chemical, and I just got a WhatsApp stating that there may be something called dustban or cricket bait and knockout still available in Trinidad. Do you have any sort of indication if that is true or not? I just got a WhatsApp from an NGO stating that it's still here, even though it's banned in the 2020 in Biden administration.
Chair, if that is still here, an illegal import, because if you import any pesticide in Tobago, you must acquire an import license, even though the pesticide is registered. So if there is a pesticide that has been deregistered by the board, there will not be the opportunity to acquire an import license to import it. So definitely that would be an illegal import, and I would request that that information be shared with us so we could take the necessary action.
Sure. And what are some of the actions you can take? Let's say somebody is selling something that is, as they say, that is banned. What is the punitive measures you have?
If the board has registered a pesticide and it's being imported, we can seize and detain that particular pesticide, as well as our legal department can take action under the legislation with regards to the importation of illegal pesticides or unregistered pesticides.
And in terms of the legal department, what sort of measures that you have? What sort of punitive measures are they in place for somebody doing that? And is there a need to look at increasing? I mean, because some of the legislation we look before, we may have a fine that may be not on with a current economic situation. So is it that it's a fine that you may now wish your legal department to say we are going to increase it? Is it something that some sort of recommendation your legal department would want to make?
So, Chairman, what I would like to clarify is that any amendment to legislation is premised on a policy decision first. And in that regard, the ministry has been actively reviewing, finalizing a draft policy in respect of amendments that may be needed in relation to the Pesticides and Toxic Chemicals Act. When that draft policy is finalized, and the expectation is following the necessary cabinet approvals and so forth, there will be legislation and amendments that can go through the process. One of the areas that will be looked at, of course, is the area of offenses, together with any other gaps that may exist under the legislation. I just want to add one area of clarification, because there's been a lot of discussion around the issue of farmers and the use of pesticides. And while, as the CMO would have indicated, it definitely is a whole of government approach in terms of food safety from the Ministry of Health perspective, while there are some functions under the Act that reside with us, the issue of regulation of those farmers would lie primarily with Ministry of Agriculture and not Ministry of Health. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Looking at legislative amendments, I'm now directing the question to the Ministry of Health, where I think according to your submission, an expansion of those responsibilities to ensure life cycle management of pesticides will enhance the operations of both the board and the inspectorate. Could you expand some more on this suggestion?
So, I mean, briefly, Mr. Ali may wish to add, from what we have seen under the Act, there is a gap in relation to the issue of pesticides and what you do with those pesticides when they are expired. And I speak in terms of disposal in particular. Under other areas and other conventions, there is this principle about the responsibility for the disposal of the product residing with the person that imported it or is manufacturing it or so forth. So we are looking at that particular aspect so that the onus does not remain with the state, but rather the onus will remain with the respective seller or importer if the pesticide was theirs, that they will now have the responsibility and the financial responsibility in particular as well associated with any disposal thereof. And Mr. Ali may wish to add.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Kaulesa Tagali. And yes, so there is also the area of labeling that we are looking at. There is now the trust towards regional harmonization with regards to issues such as labeling and packaging of pesticides that I think would be very impactful with the board in terms of being part of that harmonized system to ensure that products coming into the region as the necessary requirements to get here.
Thank you. Ms. Senator Morris Yulin would like to ask some questions.
Thank you, Chairman, but not Senator.
Yeah,
Yes.
Minister, sorry.
All right. Thank you so much. Through the chair, I would like to just draw the attention to the Ministry of, let me just lower my hand, right? To the Ministry of Health again. All right. I know, Mr. Ali, we spoke about timeframes, but I would like a status update regarding the finalization of the policy for the management of pesticide and toxic chemicals. We would like timeframes. Mr. Ali, I know that, as you say, timeframes are very difficult, but at least let us know so the public will know what we have to look forward to. And also, we are very much interested on who exactly are the stakeholders consulted and those who are expected to be consulted on this policy document, as we know, is very important, not just to Trinidad and Tobago, but for throughout the Caribbean, because we are the one that usually set the bar. And I have one follow-up question after that, Chair.
Thanks. Asmat, you want to just answer that question, please? Thanks.
Okay, with regards to the policy, that policy has been, as our legal advisor had indicated, it is at its final stages. So the pesticide board in developing that policy would have consulted with all of the stakeholders on the pesticide board, as well as private sector with regards to its development. There is the opportunity as well when you spoke about the regional aspect of it. I must say that this is not only a policy being developed in Trinidad, it's a policy being developed in all the Caribbean countries who are partners under the Jeff FAO project on sustainable pesticide management. So all of the countries are now working towards developing their pesticides management system to mirror what we would have done under that project since 2010 to 2022. All right. So this is Trinidad and Tobago's trust in terms of what we've done. We've sacrificed a lot of in-kind contribution towards the project, and we are now putting something in place coming out of the capacity development and building from that project going forward. So I would defer to my legal advisor to give us an idea in terms of the time frame for that completion, because it's very close to being submitted to the Attorney General's office. So I think she would be in a better position to advise.
So subject to my PS's recommendation, I would think that based on the documents I have seen and discussions we've already had, I mean, we could be looking at as soon as a month having a final draft that needs to go through the process for cabinet approval.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair, just support my legal advice. I think a month, as Mr. Ali said, while we would have consulted with the various stakeholders, our partners within the state sector, with the private sector, obviously we've completed that piece of work. We have a draft policy. We want to share with them just one more time to make sure that what we've come up with, they are comfortable with, they're in agreement with that. And once we have that, we'll be able to go forward. So I think, come up to Member Morris Julian's question, I think within a month, we would be able to have that final consultation with our partners and then take it forward from there. Thank you.
I see you. I think you appreciate we are really putting a trust on consumer rights and protection, and I think you may address that in your legislative agenda. Ms. Morris Julian, I think you have another question.
Yes, I do, Chairman. Thank you very much. Through the Chair, the Ministry submission stated that the encapsulation of the entire life cycle management of pesticides within the Act will assist the Inspectorate's ability to efficiently and effectively execute its mandate. In the interest of the public, please elaborate on how the absence of this process has impacted the Inspectorate, as well as, can you let us know this inability to efficiently and effectively execute its mandate? How is it affecting the persons in that particular department themselves? I hope it's not a toothless bulldog position. Thank you.
Okay, so when we talk about the life cycle management being, being or allowing the Pesticides Inspectorate to fully and efficiently execute its mandate, it's really its mandate with regards to life cycle management of pesticides. Like I just explained, this is something that came about as a result of the Jeff FAO project within the region. So it's a regional effort. We've been doing lots of work in various areas to manage pesticides, but there were gaps that the project would have identified, gaps that we were missing, for example, the disposal aspect, the end-of-life management of the containers, etc., which were not part of the daily routine or part of the work of the Inspectorate. So those areas would now be captured because it's in policy going forward for the Inspectorate to be able to enforce, and thereby completing the life cycle management system for pesticides.
Thank you. And Member Ayana Webster-Roy has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for the Ministry of Agriculture. I listened to the presentation by the representatives from Agriculture earlier, and someone would have indicated that there is a specific unit responsible for the extension officers, and that extension officers would frequently visit farmers, provide technical support, guidance on how to effectively and appropriately and responsibly use pesticides, etc. on farms. What I wanted to know, if a farmer who has been guided by the extension officers is found to still be inappropriately using pesticides, mixing them in wrong ratios, whatever, and also selling produce when they would still be within the time frame where the chemical is still in it. I don't know how to explain it properly. What would then happen? Would the extension officers make a recommendation for that farmer to lose his badge? Would he be fined? What happens?
Yes, currently there's no legislation to regulate what the farmer would use there, although the chemical may be registered by the board, right? So I don't know if that answers you.
Okay, so an extension officer would visit a farm and would recognize that the farmer is putting 3, 4, 5 different pesticides around, or they're disposing of the pesticides inappropriately and they can't do anything. That farmer will just be allowed to operate as normal. That's what happens?
You will be we guide the farmers and we will advise them what the consequence of their actions can be. So that will be the extent of our interaction, and if that situation comes up.
So what would trigger a farmer losing his badge or his license to operate his farm?
At this point is his current agricultural activity, because it's linked directly to the incentive program. A farmer being registered currently is linked to the
just incentives?
Incentive program of the ministry.
Oh, maybe that's something we should look into, consider going forward. If we have extension officers going out and visiting farmers, and if they notice any harmful practices, that they not be licensed to operate. And because some of these farmers would sell if they produce wholesale to school feeding program, to restaurants. You understand where I'm coming from, right?
Yes.
This is right.
If I may, I also want to say that 2 things I like to say. In a case like that, one of the things we do, again, is moral suasion. Because if a farmer abuses, or uses a lot of chemicals, then there's also a risk to him and his family. And so we also take it from that perspective. So every time you use it, you're at risk to when you use it when absolutely necessary. That's one. And secondly, we, in the case of school feeding program, we will ask them to purchase from registered farmers. Registered farmers are monitored by NAMDEFCO quite regularly. And it also in a way that even facilitates exports. And with exports, you have to look at the chemical use as well. So yes, we do recognize that we, the Ministry of Agriculture, or there should be some mechanism to take some sort of action if farmers are not compliant with really good agricultural practices. And what we have done is the reverse, try to encourage them to actually engage in agricultural practices. But we do agree that that is another aspect that we can, in fact, look at.
Okay, the reason I brought it up because there's a running joke in Tobago. I'm from Tobago. Whenever we go to market, one of the questions we ask, that came from Trinidad or that was grown here? Because we know most of the times the produce coming from Trinidad. I mean, Senator Hislop would agree with me. Most of the times the produce coming from Trinidad would last so long because they pumped with chemicals, right? And I think we're doing a disservice to the citizens, to our consumers. We do not disservice to our children when we allow them to eat things that are harmful. And I go back to that Facebook post because it was posted in a group for women. And she said, I just spent hard-earned money on this and I'm going to have to dump everything. So I'm looking at the stress on a mother who would have gone out to purchase something to cook. The loss of the income because you buy it, you can't use it. And then, what if she was one of those parents who didn't pay attention and decided to cook it because she claimed it was snail bait? What's going to happen to her children? So we really need to be serious. And if it is that we say we're going to be looking at farmers and how they operate, then we must have certain sanctions in place. If it is that we talk to you, you said moral suasion, it only works to a certain extent. But sometimes we have to pull out the big stick.
But I agree. I also wish to say that we have to look at it from the other perspective too. If we are going to sanction farmers, we will have to have, how should I put it, scientific evidence to show. And then, I'm sorry, but I have to go back to the testing. Somebody can, let us say, one of our extension officers can say, we believe that you mixed, I'm just saying, a cocktail of, let us say, 4 chemicals and put it and harvest it before the withdrawal time. And let's say hypothetically a farmer says, no, I did not. We need that imperative data to test it to say yes or no. So it goes back to that needs to be important or really a prerequisite before action can be taken. If you understand.
Well, I hope that is something we will be implementing in the future, that we work towards that. Because I know in some countries, people, if they're found, as you said, mixing chemicals or doing certain illegal practices, then they won't be able to operate. And I think that we advanced enough that we could get to that stage in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you so much.
And I must agree with you, member, that the plight of that housewife is there. And is there anything that would be put into the legislation that would be given to the cabinet that could address this? Have you all in the legal department addressed this, one? And then two, as we have seen, we have to give more powers to the public health inspector, probably to seize material, test it in a proper manner. But in terms of the individual who buys something that is contaminated, have you all put something in that piece of legislation to help the consumer?
So we can look at it. I mean, there's nothing right now in the present legislation that speaks to it, but I will say that under the public health ordinance, there are broad powers regarding the sale of unsound food. And under that legislation, there may be actions that can be taken by the state where it is that if, that you do encounter a situation and you do the testing and it is confirmed. Yeah, so it is something we will have to look at.
Yeah, so this is where I was got. This is what I was trying to get at. On sound food, you get it, but you have higher penalties because this is greater repercussions in terms of cancer causing agents and lymphoma and these things. So this, even diabetes, as I quoted a report. So definitely higher penalties for this, especially since we are looking at having with the point of sale where you may go in to buy it at only certain instances, and there you will be educated anytime you go. I think this is something that thinking about. And also we have to ask, are hardwares allowed to sell pesticides? Because I've been going into certain hardware and I'm seeing it. Is this something that is allowed, or is there special permission they have to get?
Yes, Chair. Just to step back a bit, Chair, and just to add to the conversation with regards to the use of pesticides and the contamination. It's a lot bigger than just taking action on the farmer. There's a whole lot of work that needs to be done in ensuring national gap. We've done a lot of work nationally with developing a national gap policy that needs to roll out. And within that national gap policy, it speaks to the pesticide management principles that farmers should adopt and the management practices within that document. That has been developed. Lots of standards have been developed by the Bureau of Standards with regards to gap and certain crops. And I think they continue to work to develop those standards. So I think lots of emphasis should be put on those documents that are already there and the implementation of those documents into action. With regards to the hardwares, like every agro shop, the hardware also needs to apply for a license to sell those pesticides. So they must be inspected, they must be adjusted by the inspectors before they can actually get permission to sell those pesticides.
Is it a good suggestion also, since we're looking at the contaminated containers, that if you are a licensed as a farmer and you buy the chemicals from a dealer that is registered to that when you're coming back to buy a new bottle of poison or container, you bring your old containers as a returnable? Is it something that you think could be a suggestion that we can make?
Well, Chair, we would be opening up a little can of worms there, because if it is that we return the container, it means that the shop owner would be able to dispense, and that's a very serious problem, because now you're putting the persons within that facility at risk, and the tampering.
No, I'm not talking about dispensing. You buy a bottle of Gramaxone or whatever, you give those persons it. Just as how when you return soft drink bottles, you have to return your empty bottles, because we're already looking at the issue of the bottles versus plastic. Do we put bottles in, as I say, in a way that prevent breakage? So we already will have to determine what is the best way to store it. But let us say I buy a bottle, but I'm going back next month for another bottle. I do a return on my bottle, and that now the state will now be able to take that and dispose of that rather than leave it out for the farmer to just, we don't know what they will do with it.
But Chair, that is also part of the People for the People Foundation's project in terms of that returnable. What they're looking at is for it to be sustainable, because if you tell a farmer or anybody to just bring back an item without getting a benefit, there's really no benefit to them. So now that benefit aspect is being worked out, whether it should be a rebate or some sort when they return the container that they get on the next purchase, that would be worked out between the importer and the agro shop and the farmer. So there's a system that's being looked at that has been used in other parts of the world. When the containers are returned, the farmer can benefit from that return, which would encourage them to continue doing it, and which would tie back to the state policy in terms of being able to take those containers now and dispense or dispose of them appropriately.
Or even tell them if they don't bring back their container, they will not be allowed to purchase. So this is something that, because sometimes a container for a bottle might cost hardly anything. But even though you're allowed to purchase certain amount, and if you don't return this, you're not going to get to purchase more. Therefore, should there be some sort of tracking system where farmers now cannot go to one area, another area and buy? Should there be like for instance, how the Ministry of Health was determining to get a pharmacy card for patients to track their things? Should there be a tracking system for persons who are going to buy these chemicals? Even persons for home use, that you'll have an idea who's buying what and what is stored and if they could return it. Is that feasible?
Of course, with regards to the farmers, at one time the pesticide board had looked at the fact that the farmer card can be used as a system for tracking the purchase. For certain pesticides, farmers are required to submit information. For example, all the class 1 pesticides that they purchase, the farmers are required to submit their names, their address, etc. And within that system, we can develop some sort of tracking system for when the containers are being returned. But I will also make that suggestion that the board had some years ago with regards to a farmer card system, so that that card can be used as a template to identify who purchases and the quantities, etc., and the returns.
And how could we cut down members of the public just going to buy some Gramaxone to use it to harm themselves? In terms of, remember, years ago, there was a geographical belt where from Santa Cruz going down to Maruga, coming up to Caroni, that belt was highly agricultural and you got persons there using the Gramaxone. Is there any way that you could put an added sort of a precaution for persons just going in to buy this for their home use?
What can be done is once we can implement that system, certain pesticides would be available to farmers only. There are a lot of products that we have registered in Trinidad that are available for home use and that are a lot less toxic, that can be used by the homeowners and by the small agriculturists.
Sure. And I want a question. Is it that somebody had asked me to ask a question, is it Gramaxone and Malaterion are banned in other nations, developed nations? And is that so that it's banned in certain countries?
Some countries would have taken decisions with regards to different pesticides. And we remain cognizant of the fact that some of those pesticides are still here. But like I said, we will take those approaches once we can ascertain from the bodies of science that those pesticides do cause or pose a problem, and they are recommending to countries to take the necessary action. But the board has always been reviewing pesticides that are being removed and the reasons for their removal in other jurisdictions.
We have to take cognizance that Trinidad has a high rate of suicide and gramoxone was used. So therefore, even though international bodies may hesitate to ban it, while other countries have banned it, we have to take awareness of what's going on in Trinidad and factor that in to some of our decisions. Would it help our persons who are depressed and thinking about suicide also? So these are other avenues I think you have to take into account. Now, one question I have to ask now, if, for instance, we already talk about residual testing to be given more powers to your inspectors and have a fast track system, waterways. Let us say there's a runner from agriculture. Is it the IMA has to test it and give you the information? Could you request the IMA that you would want them to test certain areas, and would they listen to you? Is there cooperation?
There's always a cooperation with bodies such as the IMA. In fact, on the pesticide board, we have, for example, the EMA, who is a sitting member of the board. So we have various ministries, who are there. And of course, the IMA would fall under a particular line ministry. So I think, yes, we do have that cooperation with them to supply any services that may be required.
So therefore, you're dependent on them to at least guide you if there are certain areas that are being contaminated. So this is good. Now, I read a report on persistent organic pollutants and pesticides. And this report, it mentioned POPs are a set of toxic chemicals that are persistent in the environment and able to last for several years before breaking down. And this is the UNEP GPA 2006. I need to find out, does anybody, any bodies in Trinidad, any organization, do soil testing to see if there's like one layer of chemical on top to another layer of chemical building up in the soil that could actually serve as a guide that if a farmer is misusing the chemicals?
With regards to the persistent organic pollutants, as I indicated, the pesticide board would have taken that decision a long time ago to stop the importation of all of them. And that would have been, of course, the initial dirty dozen, and then the subsequent pesticides, which would have been listed under the Stockholm Convention, right? But of course, with regards to testing, the University of the West Indies Soil Sciences Department, they've been very vigilant in the country, and they've been doing on different soil types to identify the presence of certain pesticides. And they've also been able to create systems to allow for regenerative work in soil, and more so the depletion of pesticide residues using different types of approaches, microorganisms, as well as the use of sunlight exposure, etc., to help break down some of the pesticides in the soil.
Yes, I had discussions with Mr. Vishnu Budu Singh from a NGO of Safe Soil, where they are looking at actually getting the regeneration of soil worldwide. And I think there was a report some years ago in Tobago that even the soil, the good soil, 15% of it has been lost over a period of time. So even the regeneration, getting soil with less chemicals, which will be harmful to the microorganisms in the soil, which is responsible for fertile soil. I think this is something that soil testing may be something that public health inspectors, we may look at recommending public health inspectors also take part in that with a definite lab that may be able to look at the soil testing. But this persistent organic pollutants and pesticide report, it made mention that the POPs circulate globally, and chemicals released in one part of the world can be deposited as far distances from the original source through a repeated process of evaporation and deposition. Now, this is frightening because, I mean, you have to have global CARICOM buy-in that whatever they're using there will not be evaporated and deposited here. Does anybody test the rainwater to see if there are any sort of pollutants in it based on this report, it's something I think we need to consider. Do you know if anyone does testing on
At
the?
this time,
Oh, yeah.
I don't know of anybody who would have been doing any sort of testing on rainwater to determine if we have any sorts of residues in them.
Mr. Hislop, I think you have a question you wanted to pose.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to follow up on Member Webster Roy, is there, or are the retail outlets for chemicals, are they required to produce or to display their license for sale of chemicals and pesticides?
Yes, they are.
They're required. Okay. And if they're not displayed, what would be the repercussions of that?
Well, it's required under regulation. So if they do not display their license, the license, well, in fact, we can refer to the legal department who can then take action. We can be very, in the first instance, approach them to have that license displayed. And if it is that they refuse to do it, we then go the step further and refer to our legal department to take the necessary action.
Because I honestly can't recall seeing a license being displayed for the public at any agro shop that I've been to for the purchase of pesticides or chemicals. So that's why I'm wondering if it is required by law to be displayed. And so, Chairman, this may be a policy decision via the Ministry of Agriculture, but I was wondering if there's any plan, long-term goal for the agricultural sector to become fully organic when it comes to pesticides, because we are truly concerned. We've heard it here this morning about the what can happen to the human body when there is excess use of pesticides in the produce that we eat. So I was just wondering if there is a desired goal, long-term goal from the Ministry of Agriculture for our agricultural sector to become organic in terms of its pesticides.
With regard to organic, I'm not sure you're speaking of organic farming, because there are certain requirements to be classed as organic. You shouldn't have residues present for the last how many years and things like that. So I think the goal really would be to be more sustainable and to produce food that is safe and acceptable to the consumer.
And Mr. Chairman, I hear that, and some of these catchphrases are nice, but who's really responsible for determining what is sustainable and safe for the consumer?
Yes, so you're looking at food that is safe for consumer health and also for the environment based on the maximum residue limits that have been determined as acceptable for human consumption.
Understood. Understood. Mr. Chairman, if I'm allowed to ask, there's a question that is here based on the submission as it relates to additional infrastructure as necessary to optimize the operations of the Inspectorate. Coming out of that submission, we would like to find out if details, or if you can provide details on the additional resources that are necessary to optimize the operations of the Inspectorate as it relates to the hazardous cargo bay. And question 2 to that is, the inspectorate requested an increase in storage facilities for pesticides and hazardous chemicals. What is the current arrangement to store additional pesticides when storage facilities are full or full to capacity? I think that's for the Ministry of Health, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you, Chair. I'll let my registrar, Mr. Ali, just respond to those two questions. Thank you.
Okay. Chair, through you, well, with regards to the hazardous cargo bay, that is an initiative where the inspectorate can be on the port and examine cargo coming in and out. As it is currently, we cannot inspect hazardous cargo at the port of entry on the cessation because of the hazardous nature of the goods. So those items are usually inspected on the port, at the port floor, not at the cess, as well as at the port, at the location where the item would be, at the importer's location, right? So what we are saying is that if we can do that inspection at the port on a cess station, it would allow us to look at view the items coming in and make a determination specifically if the items can be allowed to enter Trinidad or not, if they meet the requirements, if they are registered, etc. So that's what that question is for. And with regards to the hazardous cargo bay on the port. With regards to the storage facility, it's not that we have facilities that are overfilled. We are asking for a facility to allow us, in the event that we do seize items, etc., that we can use that facility or detain items, that we could hold it at those facilities, until the items can be disposed of. Currently, we do have a current location and a minimal storage because we would have done a big export in 2016 for that disposal. So we are currently storing very small amount, but we have been trying to be proactive in terms of forecasting. If it is that we need additional storage facilities for the future, that we could definitely benefit from having one.
Mr. Chairman, just a follow-up to that. What is the disposal process for the expired and outdated chemicals?
Like I indicated previously, we do not have the capacity in Trinidad to dispose of obsolete pesticides. That was clearly shown by the FAO in its project in 2016. So those pesticides need to be exported to an approved facility for disposal. And like I explained previously, it will have been through the Basel Convention and under their requirements within which we would have done that export. So it's similar for any items that the state would seize. We would need to have that facility and arrangement in place so that they could then be exported for disposal.
So Mr. Ali, what do you do? What do you do now when you have collected expired chemicals and outdated chemicals? What do you do now?
So we have
the
ability to either seize and detain or detain on premises. And of course, the inspectorate would be the one to ensure that those items are not tampered with, etc., until the state can dispose of it and arrangements are made for the disposal, right? I think our legal advisor indicated that there is also the opportunity for pesticides being imported once the importers can be identified, that they bear the cost for those disposals. And we've done that in the past, where shipments coming into the country that are not registered, the importer bears the cost to export those items out of the country for disposal, and is not a cost borne by the state, right? But there are some instances where the state may have within remit due to seizures and being not able to identify who the various importers are. But we have to take those items. It would be, again, the state who would have to bear that cost of disposal at some time.
So Mr. Chairman, if I have 1,000 gallons of expired toxic chemicals and pesticides at my warehouse, and the inspectorate comes and recognizes that it is expired, that chemical is not removed from my premises, that's what you're saying, until it can be exported?
Your premises will be locked down if it is that it only holds that chemical for storage. And
complete premises.
It will be confiscated by and locked down. And if it's your responsibility and it's determined that you are the reason why those chemicals were expired, you will have to bear the cost for disposal.
Okay, so if I have 1,000 gallons of expired, but I have another 1,000 that is good, the only part of my premises that will be locked down is the part that has the expired goods, or the entire.
If I may, sorry, Chairs, if I may, remember, I think that is where, and you mentioned earlier, where Mr. Ali spoke about the increase in storage facilities. It is being proactive. So I'm subject to correction, but I don't think we have had instances of that volume of seized chemicals, and we hope we never have that sort of volume of seized chemicals. But in the unlikely event, that's why we're looking for increased storage facilities. So what happens right now, as he said, there's seized on location, store on location. We have seized certain items, small quantities, but we are looking at doing that exercise that Mr. Ali spoke about in 2016 with regard to disposal of outside of the country, so to speak. So that is something that we are doing regularly. You'd appreciate that it can't happen every year. I mean, you need a certain volume to make that happen, but that's something we are looking at right now. And that increased storage facility, it is in the unlikely event what you just mentioned may happen, but I think historically, and Asma can speak more to it, in terms of what we found out, our experience, that has not been our experience of having that volume of expired chemicals. But I do take your point, anything is possible, but that has not been our experience so far.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I guess you're prepared for it in case, yeah, thank you. So we realize the important role of the health inspectors, and I think you stated in your report every year inspectors are issued with a list of premises requiring renewal for their designated area. Timeframes are set for completion and monthly progress reports are generated. My question is, the Ministry of Health of the view that inspectors have met their premises renewal targets?
Yes, the inspectors have met their renewal targets by ensuring all the premises would have been inspected, and we continue as well to look for new premises as they become established as well.
Sure. Have there been challenges in, if any, in meeting this standard?
No, they continue to be very vigilant, the inspectors, in terms of doing their work. As we indicated, there is the opportunity for the 3 inspectors, those positions being filled, that would continue to support the Inspectorate going forward.
And I would like you to provide data in writing on the total number of premises that require renewal annually and the number of outstanding premises yet to receive renewal. So if you could please provide that. Again, I'd like to ask a question that on your submission, you stated to take with the approval of the Comptroller of Customs and Excise samples of any articles when imported into TT, but not delivered to the imported out of charge of customs, and submit them to an analysis for examination. On how many occasions were such actions taken during the period 2019 to 2022?
Okay, so we did not take any samples during that period, and specifically because the board would have developed a system and for the inspectorate to follow with regards to the use of certificates of analyses for shipments coming into Trinidad and Tobago. So the request of those shipments from the manufacturers would therefore be sufficient evidence of the products being tested prior to export to Trinidad.
Sure, and thank you. And then I know the discussion was natural versus the man-made pesticides, but even we have to remember, even arsenic was a natural pesticide used before DDT, and even that had proved harmful. And there's something called rotenone, a plant extract, but it's toxic to fish and linked to Parkinson's for farm workers, and it was banned from from farm workers in the United States. So debate still continues if one high synthetic spray with high-powered spray is better than repeated with sprays with natural pesticides. So this debate is still on in terms of how is the best policy. But the fact remains, farmers lose about 20 to 40% of crops to pests. And we are now asked to form a balance where the farmers are asked to produce, but we are looking at the health hazards from the chemicals that are leached into the environment. And I must say that this morning I was happy to have the knowledge that was garnered from all factors present, all persons present. And the world's agriculture sector has been challenged to increase the output due to the rapid demands for food. And I think this morning, we are looking at the fact that the environment is the center of social and economic development. And we have to get the best practices that are available. And I was comforted to see that there's legislation on the table that would be going forward soon. So as we come to the close, I would like to ask any of my members, do you have any other questions you would like to ask? No. Okay, so at this stage, I would like Mr. Asif Ali, the Permanent Secretary, to please give some closing remarks.
Sure. Thank you again, Chair. So, Chair, as I said at the start of my opening remarks, we look forward to the suggestions and the observations. We've gotten quite a few suggestions and recommendations from the committee, which we have taken on board. I'm not going to go over all of those, but two major ones would have been the issue of testing and public education. I do acknowledge that there's room for some improvements of our public education, not just that weekly thing we do every year, but to make our information more readily available to the general public, not just the farmers, but the general public. So we'll definitely work on that with regard to our social media pages. We will also continue to work with the Ministry of Agriculture as they interact with their farmers and that client base to provide support to the Ministry of Agriculture. And again, we've taken on board the other suggestions that have been made, and we will definitely incorporate those into our policy that we're looking at going forward with to amend our legislation. Thank you again, Chair and members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. Could Dr. Simone Titus, the Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, give some brief closing comments?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members of the board. The Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries, our staff, we want to really thank you for the opportunity to be here and to contribute. It has truly been an educational learning experience for us. We want to end by saying we recognize that pesticide use is really important in Trinidad and Tobago, and more importantly, judicious use. And we will continue to work with our stakeholders, our key stakeholders, especially the Ministry of Health, and as I said, all the other stakeholders to effectively address this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Titus. As we all here this morning to at least produce something better, safer for our environment and our people. I wish to thank the officials of the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Agriculture, Land and Fisheries for your contributions to today's proceedings. I wish to thank the committee members who participated remotely and the staff of the Office of Parliament for your procedural and logistical support, and the viewing and listening audience. I would like to now declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you very much.